All right, it's time to start the session. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Vaishnavi from TGHC. I'm the operations manager here. Thank you so much for joining in. We are right now ready to start the session. And as you all know, the topic here is impact of social media on body shaming and self-esteem. I believe this is a very, very relevant topic and it's the need of the hour. And to talk about this, we have our expert counseling psychologist, Shruti, with us. Before proceeding, I would just like to give a small introduction about Shruti so that we get to know her more. Shruti is a counseling psychologist with TGHC. She uses multiple tools like CBT, that is cognitive behavioral therapy, or dialectical behavioral therapy, creative writing therapy, etc., along, with an essential approach for counseling with a focus on the strength, history, and vision of the client. She's also part of HR panel at multiple organizations as a consultant, helping them to shape their mental health policy and also structure the team dynamics and SOPs. She also specializes across a diverse range of mental health concerns, such as anxiety, depression, relationship issues, self-growth, etc. She's basically a master's in counseling psychology from Christ, Bangalore. That's a great thing, Shruti. So let's right now dive into it. Shruti, over to you.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Vaishnavi. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here. I hope you're all having a pleasant afternoon so far. And the topic that we're going to be speaking about today is the impact of social media on body image and self-esteem. Like Vaishnavi said, this is a very, very important topic for us to speak about, simply because of how prevalent social media use is right now and how influential it is across so many different areas of our life. Just to take you all over a brief session outline, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be speaking a little bit about body image. That is, what is body image and how do we understand body image? Then we're going to spend some time speaking about how social media influences body image. In what ways does social media influence body image? And then we'll move on to speaking about self-esteem and how social media impacts our self-esteem and how we look at ourselves and how we measure our worth. And lastly, we'll also be speaking about how we can be mindful of the impact that social media has on all of these different areas of our lives, like our body image and our self-esteem. We'll try to speak of some strategies or some ways in which we can have a healthier relationship with social media itself so that we're able to use it in a way that is healthy and effective for us. Lastly, we'll also have some time for a short Q&A segment. So if you guys have any questions, anything that comes up during the session, feel free to maybe put it in the chat or hold on to it to, until the end of the session and we can address it then. Even as we speak, if there are any thoughts, anything that comes to mind that you want to share, feel free to just put it in the chat. I'll just keep looking at it periodically. So if there is anything, we can always address it that way. We'll start off with speaking a little bit about social media usage. Considering we are speaking about social media's impact on these different areas of our life, it makes it more important for us to understand just how prevalent social media use is. As of 2023 January, India was home to 467 million social media users across different platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, LinkedIn, YouTube, WhatsApp, and there are definitely more platforms that are not mentioned here. These are just the major platforms that a lot of us spend a lot of time in. And the reasons why we spend time on these platforms, the reasons we use these platforms are so diverse, right? And so are the accounts that we follow, the people that we follow on these, all of these social media applications. We might follow influencers, we might follow celebrities, we might follow, important political leaders. We might also follow our friends, our loved ones. And we might be exposed to all of these different aspects, all of these different areas and all of these different aspects of the world as we spend time on social media. We might use social media for so many reasons as well, right? We use it to stay in touch with our friends. Maybe we use it to stay updated with the news or to stay updated with the trends. Or we might also use social media to continue to follow or support causes that we really support, or stay in touch with certain celebrities or influencers who we look up to. So there are so many diverse and so many varied uses of social media. And so it makes sense that it impacts us so greatly in all of these different areas of our life, because it has become sort of a central part of our lives today, right? Even most of our communication happens on WhatsApp, or most of it happens on other social media platforms. And we spend so much of our daily life on a social media platform. So it makes sense that we are trying to spend some time just to understand how it influences us and how we can be more mindful of this influence. Speaking a little bit about body image, we'll just spend some time understanding and just unpacking body image and what we mean when we use the word body image. Essentially, what we are referring to by using the word body image is our perceptions, our thoughts, our feelings about our body and other aspects of our body, like our physical appearance, our body size, our weight, our shape, right? So it's essentially a package of all of the thoughts and feelings that we have in relation to our body, right? The way we visualize our bodies in our head, the internal representation of our outer appearance is what we call our body image. And our body image is a very personal, it's a very individual sort of a construct, because we all have different perceptions, different visuals of how we look at our body, right? So it's a very personal, it's a very individual sort of an experience. And body image is also very closely tied to physical and psychological health and our quality of life, as well as our self-esteem, because our bodies are such an integral part of our identity, and we spend so much time, being in our bodies, being with our bodies. So it makes sense that it affects so many different aspects of our life as well. Those of us who have a healthy or a positive body image have been found to have better physical and psychological health outcomes, better quality of life, better self-esteem as well. And we use the word positive and negative body image just to categorize and understand body image a little bit more, because it helps us to have a measurement or a metric point as to how we can understand body image. So we try to look at it as a spectrum ranging from positive to negative. So on the positive end of our body image, those of us who have a positive or healthy body image tend to have more of a comfortable relationship with our body. We feel more comfortable in our skin. We are more accepting of our body. And we also understand that our bodies are not all there is to us. There are other things about our identity. There are other things about our personality that are also equally important. So those of us with a positive body image may also recognize that all bodies are different. No two bodies are the same. And at the same time, all of these differences in our bodies are also valuable and are worthy of our respect and our love. So when we speak about having a positive body image, what it essentially boils down to is having a healthy relationship with your body, having a healthy perception of your body. On the other end of it, we speak about having a negative body image. So negative body image is essentially when we have an unhealthy or a negative relationship with our body. In the sense that when we think about our body, or when we try to think about something in relation to our body, we're left feeling not happy, we're left feeling dissatisfied, we're left feeling anxious or stressed, right? These are some indicators that we might have a negative body image when we try to think about our bodies, and what it leaves us with is certain unpleasant or negative feelings. So when we're speaking about being on the negative side of the body image spectrum, what it might look like for us is that we might always shy away from, looking at our bodies. We might shy away from allowing other people to look at our bodies. We might also not engage in activities. We might not engage in any physical activities that, sort of put us out there, that sort of open us to any sort of judgment or any sort of ridicule. We might also constantly monitor what we eat, or we might constantly monitor our calorie intake, right? And we might constantly check ourselves in the mirror, or check our weight constantly. We might have a lot of checking behaviors present as well. And all of these are indicators of having an unhealthy relationship with our body. We're having a negative, unhealthy relationship with our body that then translates into having a negative body image. So a negative body image is characterized by a lot of body dissatisfaction, just unhappiness with our body, and wishes to change or wishes to be different or to, make our body look or be different. And when we also speak about having, a healthy or an unhealthy body image, those of us with a healthy body image may focus on our bodies as a whole. That is, we recognize that our bodies are not just certain aspects or certain particular, aspects about ourselves. We recognize that our body is a whole individual, entity. It's a whole individual being. But on the other hand, those of us with an unhealthy body image may be drawn to focus more on perceived imperfections or certain disliked features. I'm using the word perceived imperfections because a lot of the times when we speak about any imperfections, any flaws, they are mostly only visible to us. If we ask somebody else, hey, do you think I have this imperfection or do you think I have this physical flaw? They may not be able to notice it, which is why I use the word perceived imperfections. So while those of us with a healthy body image may understand and look at our body as a whole, those of us with an unhealthy body image may only focus on certain specific things that we don't like about our body and ignore everything else that is good or that is healthy about our body. It's completely okay for us to sometimes have a negative relationship with our body in the sense that maybe sometimes very certain few instances, maybe we feel dissatisfied. Maybe you want to work out more, or maybe you want to wear certain types of clothes. It's absolutely normal for us to have certain instances where we feel dissatisfied with our body. But when it becomes a consistent pattern of having a negative body image, when we are consistently unhappy with our bodies, it can contribute to a range of mental health conditions like body dysmorphic disorder, eating disorders, and other mental health conditions like anxiety or depression. Because when we are constantly unhappy with our body, we're constantly trying to do something to reach a certain level of satisfaction or to reach a certain level of happiness with our body. And when these negative patterns constantly repeat, they might then translate into certain mental health conditions that we might need to seek professional support for. So, so far, what we have sort of gathered is that body image is a sum total of all of the perceptions, all of the feelings, all of the thoughts that we have about our body, and it can be understood on a spectrum of having a positive body image to having a negative body image. What I want to speak about next is how body image can be influenced by so many different factors. Right? Growing up, we do learn so much, we do borrow so much from our environment and from everything that's happening around us. So it makes sense that body image is also something that is so heavily influenced by everything that we're exposed to. And that can include our friends, peers, and family. So in our families, usually we might notice that there might sometimes be direct comments about weight that, hey, you need to eat less or you need to eat more or don't wear certain kinds of clothes. They don't look good on you. Or there might also be indirect sort of messages that we receive from our body. For example, when we observe our parents being too critical of their body and their appearance, or when we observe them maybe dieting excessively or not eating certain food to lose weight, we might receive messages about our body through direct or indirect means from our families. Even from our friends and peers and our peer groups, we might, a lot of us might face criticism or bullying, or, there might be a lot of comparison in friend groups, especially when we are younger, when we are growing up, when we still don't understand that it's important for us to be kind to ourselves and other people. There might be a lot of comparison, there might be a lot of criticism that then influences the relationship that we have with our body. Our culture also influences our body image to a great extent, particularly in our Indian culture, right? There are certain expectations of what women should look like. There are certain expectations of what men should look like. And that is what is considered acceptable. That is what is considered, wanted by everybody in the culture. So when we do constantly receive these messages from our culture, they do influence our relationship with our body and they influence the way we see ourselves. Individual characteristics in terms of our gender or our age, our past experiences of bullying or harassment, or even our personality factors might also influence our body image and our relationship with our body. Right? There's a lot of research that suggests that women are more likely to have difficult relationships with their body because of all of the messages that we receive from all of these different sources about what our body should look like. So there's also that gendered aspect to it. There is an age aspect to it. Some of us are just based on our personality, we're just a little more vulnerable to criticism, or we tend to be a little more perfectionist. That might also affect our relationship with our body, because then we might expect our body to look a certain perfect way. Lastly, media, which is what we're also going to focus on a little bit more. For a lot of, for the last couple of decades, social media has become the main sort of influence on our body images, but we also need to take into account the influence of television shows or movies or magazines, newspapers that also send certain messages about what our bodies are supposed to look like and what our relationship with our body is supposed to look like. So we'll come back to the media's influence on body image in a couple of slides. What I also want to pay attention to is what happens when we internalize the messages that are communicated to us through all of these sources, right? All of these sources tell us certain things about our body, or tell us that we are expected to look a certain way, we're expected to be a certain way. What happens when we constantly, continuously keep receiving these messages is that we tend to internalize them. That is, they become ingrained inside of us. And then when we internalize these messages, we start comparing ourselves with what is expected of us. We start comparing ourselves with the ideal body type, with the perfect body type. And when we compare ourselves with these ideals and we fall short, that's when body dissatisfaction builds. We start becoming more and more dissatisfied with our bodies. And when we start becoming dissatisfied with our bodies, we try to do things that will reduce that dissatisfaction. Maybe we start dieting excessively, or we constantly monitor what we eat, or we do a lot of checking behaviors. And then that becomes a pattern of having a negative body image. That becomes a pattern of our negative body image just building on more and more, unless we make it a point to just slow down and unlearn all of these things that we have learned, so we can develop a healthy relationship with our body. So this is a little bit about the influences that we have on our body image. What I want to speak about next is how social media influences our body image. And this is where I'm going to need a little bit of your contribution, right? So far we've understood that the way in which social media, influences, or any sort of media influences our body image is through all of the messages, all of the ideas that it spreads and highlights, right? So I'm curious to know from all of you, and feel free to put it in the chat, what are some messages that you've received about what bodies should look like, or what we should look like, or what sort of bodies are considered acceptable? Can you think of any messages that, that might have been communicated to us through media? One example that comes to my mind is the thinness ideal, right? That thin bodies are more valuable. Thin people are more valuable than fat people or anybody who's not thin. So I'm wondering if you have any ideas as to what sort of messages you may have received, throughout your experience of social media. Just take about 5 seconds to think about it and put it in the chat. I'm curious to hear what all of you think. What do you think you've learned or heard from social media about what your body or what other bodies is supposed to look like? Is there anything that comes to mind for anyone? If not, that's okay too. We can come back to it. Whenever something comes up, just feel free to put it in the chat. So through the messages that we receive from social media about our bodies, we start to understand and we start to learn what is considered acceptable, what is considered valuable, and what is wanted and what is considered normal by the society. So when social media or any other media constantly tells us that thin people are more valuable and that fat people are unacceptable, or that fat bodies are unacceptable, we start to understand that, okay, fine, maybe my existence is unacceptable, it is unwanted. And the way my body looks is not wanted by society. And when we start to internalize those messages, that ends up in us having a very difficult relationship with ourselves, because now we're having a relationship with our body that is not considered acceptable by society, right? So that ends up in us having a very negative view of ourselves, having a very negative view of our body. Another thing that social media also does is it shapes unrealistic beauty standards and idealized body types. So when I talk about unrealistic beauty standards, what comes to mind is all of the celebrities or all of the influencers that we see on social media, right? When they post their own stories or when they post their faces on social media, we immediately start comparing ourselves with them, right? We immediately start comparing our our bodies, our faces with them, and obviously we're not going to be able to match up to that, because what we forget is that all of these celebrities, all of these social media influencers have a huge team of stylists, of editors, of people whose job it is to make them look good, right? So when we compare ourselves with all of these people, we naturally fall short, and that is when we start to have a difficult relationship with our body, because we're seeing somebody who looks so beautiful, who looks so pretty, and we don't feel adequate enough in comparison to them, right? So we try to measure ourselves against a very unrealistic sort of a beauty standard. And it's also very important for us to speak about comparison, because it's a very natural thing for us to compare ourselves with other people. It's very natural that we constantly find ourselves comparing ourselves with other people. But it's also important for us to be cautious and to be careful of what and who we compare ourselves with, right? Because it may be unhealthy, it may be unhelpful for us to constantly compare ourselves with everybody on social media, because we don't live the same reality as they do. They don't live the same reality as we do, right? Like we spoke earlier, people that we see on social media, like celebrities, may have a huge team behind them who's making sure that they look good, right? So their reality is very, very different from our reality, and it may not make sense for us to compare us and them, and to compare how we look to how they look. The last thing that it also does is it may intensify pre-existing mental health conditions, which is if a lot of us already have a difficult relationship with our body, or we have certain disordered eating patterns, or if we have eating disorders, constant exposure to social media and constant exposure to all of these messages from social media might just intensify all of these mental health conditions, might worsen our experience of these mental health conditions. It can send us spiraling down a spiral of anxiety or of depression when we constantly compare ourselves with other people and we constantly find ourselves falling short. So essentially, to sum it up, our relationship with our bodies can be severely impacted by social media because of the messages that it sends across, because of the sort of narratives that it chooses to highlight, and the sort of people or the sort of faces that it pushes out into the front. It's very natural that we feel influenced by social media, because that has always been the case. We have always been influenced by the media that we consume. But currently, we're also at a point in our world where social media is moving further and further away from reality, which means that what we see on social media may not always be an accurate representation of reality. And it may be unhelpful or unhealthy for us to constantly compare ourselves with what we see on the screen. So that was a little bit about the impact of social media on body image. Does anyone have any thoughts that they want to share? Anything that has come to mind while we've been talking, or anything that you might want to add? I will take about 5 seconds in case there is anything anyone wants to share. Okay. If anything does come up for anybody, feel free to unmute, feel free to unmute actually, or feel free to put it in the chat, whatever works for you. I'm going to just gently move on. Speaking about self-esteem, we spoke a little bit about the different ways in which social media influences our body image, and I also want to spend a little bit time speaking about how social media influences our self-esteem. And both of these things are very intricately connected. They are very overlapping with each other. The relationship that we have with our body and the relationship that we have with ourselves. If we look at our body image as the relationship that we have with our body, we can look at self-esteem as the relationship that we have with ourselves. When we try to understand self-esteem, we can try to understand it as the value that we place on ourselves as a person, right? The sort of worth that I attribute to myself as a person. When I think about myself, or when I try to think about how I feel about myself, what comes up for me? That is essentially the core of our self-esteem, our overall opinion of ourselves. We have opinions about everybody, right? Our friends, family, everybody. So our opinion of ourselves also matters just as much. When we talk about having self-esteem, we also speak about being accepting, respecting, and believing in ourselves, right? So we are accepting of everything that we are, no matter our strengths, no matter our weaknesses, perfections, imperfections, all of it. We're accepting of who we are. We're also respectful towards ourselves. We're respectful towards, our needs. We're respectful towards our wants. And we also believe in ourselves. We believe in our capabilities. We believe in our skills. We believe in, our potential to do better. Our self-esteem, just like our body image, can also be influenced by a lot of different factors, like our families. Similar to what we spoke about body image, if you've grown up in very critical families, in families where everyone is very self-critical or everyone is very, harsh, we might have a very difficult relationship with ourselves. We might constantly try to hold ourselves up to certain, standards, and we might constantly think that we're not doing enough or we're not good enough, right? If you've grown up in families where that has been the norm, that sort of criticism, that sort of feedback has been the norm, then we might apply the same thing to ourselves. Similarly, in friendships and peer relations, if we've had experiences of bullying, or we've had experiences where we've felt inferior to our friends, we've compared ourselves to our friends and we've felt inferior, that might also influence the relationship that we have with ourselves. Even the influence of culture and society on self-esteem is important, because we might notice that, in our culture, there are certain milestones or certain goals that you have to reach by a certain age, right? For example, you've finished college, get a job, then you get married, and then you start that phase of your life. So oftentimes what happens is we also, when we think of ourselves in relation to all of these milestones, if we find ourselves falling short, we might have a negative view of ourselves. We might say that, okay, I couldn't even do that. That is expected of me, and I couldn't even do that. And that might lead to us having a very negative view of ourselves. Similarly, in our relationships, if we've had, negative relationship experiences, or if we've had relationships that have gone south in a very unhealthy, in a very toxic sort of a manner, that might also leave us with a very low self-esteem, with a very low perception of ourselves. And lastly, media, which we will discuss a little bit more as we go along. But similarly, in line with what we spoke about, body image, right? What happens when we receive all of these messages about ourselves and what our relationship with ourselves is supposed to look like growing up? We slowly start to internalize all of these messages, and after a point, they just become very unconscious, automatic standards that we hold ourselves up against, that we constantly compare ourselves up against. And when that happens, we keep trying harder and harder to sort of be happier with ourselves, or to reduce that gap between what we are and what we think we have to be. And that leads to a pattern of very low self-care, or we might be super harsh on ourselves. We might be very critical of ourselves, and that can also lead to the development of several mental health conditions like depression or anxiety. These are mental health conditions characterized by our perception of ourselves, our perception of the world, right? So when our perception of ourselves is low, when we do have a poor or low self-esteem, that might make us really, really vulnerable to developing a lot of different mental health conditions, and also make us more vulnerable to entering unhealthy or unhelpful or negative patterns. I also want to speak a little bit more about, self-esteem in terms of the spectrum again, right? High or low, or positive or negative. When the value that we place on ourselves is low or negative, when we have a negative or low self-esteem, that might be characterized by a lot of self-criticism, a lot of negative self-talk, which is the inner dialogue that you have with yourself, right? That's what we call self-talk. So it might be characterized by a lot of negative self-talk. We might not have confidence in our skills. We might feel that we're not good enough, we're not skilled enough. We might also see ourselves as inferior or less than others. These are just some characteristics or some characteristic traits of someone with low self-esteem. While it is absolutely normal for us to have fluctuations in our confidence, or for us to sometimes feel like, okay, I'm not good enough, sometimes that that fluctuation in confidence is what might motivate us to do better or to be better, right? While it's completely normal for that to happen sometimes, when we constantly have a low self-esteem or when we're constantly, having a poor self-esteem, we might end up unhappy with ourselves most of the time. Then that is not healthy. Sometimes it's completely normal for us to feel like we have low self-esteem or to feel like we're inferior to others. But when that happens most of the time, or when that happens all of the time, that's when we might want to do something about it. When we talk about healthy self-esteem, that can look like looking at ourselves in a very balanced sort of a way, a very wholesome, balanced way. That these are my skills, these are my, weaknesses, these are my strengths, and I understand and accept all of them. Right? We might also consider ourselves as equal to everyone else. Anybody with a healthy or a good self-esteem might look at themselves as equal to everyone else. They might feel confident in expressing themselves. They might be more respectful of their personal boundaries, and they might also be more accepting of themselves and the others around them, right? So what we notice here is that when we have a positive self-esteem or when we have a healthy self-esteem, we're also able to be more open to the world. We are able to be open to more opportunities. But when we have a negative self-esteem, that might close us off from other people, that might close us off from opportunities that we might really, really want. So that was a little bit about self-esteem and how we can understand self-esteem on a spectrum of high self-esteem and low self-esteem, and what both of these ends of the spectrum can look like. I also want to speak now about social media's impact on self-esteem, right? Just like we spoke about the impact of body image on self-esteem, we might also want to speak about social media's impact on self-esteem. What happens, when our self-esteem is impacted by social media is that we might constantly start measuring our worth through the engagement that we get. Right? So on social media, you might say that the crux of social media is the engagement that we get, or the likes that we get, or the views that we get, right? That's what keeps social media going. We're always speaking about expanding our social media marketing strategies, about getting a higher reach, getting more views, right? So what happens when we constantly focus on that is we start measuring our worth, or we start measuring our value as a person through the engagement that we get, right? So if I have a certain number of views or a certain number of likes, I feel good about myself as a person. If I don't, that immediately impacts how I see myself as a person. Social media might also push us or force us to only focus on the good parts of life, right? So when we're comparing ourselves with people on social media, we often forget that what we see is only the good parts of people's life. We only see the highlight reels of people's life. If you reflect on your own relationship or your own social media use, you might notice that, we're more likely to post pictures, we're more likely to post something on social media when we're feeling good, or when we're feeling happy about something, or we're feeling content about something. So that's a principle we might want to keep in mind when we are comparing ourselves with other people on social media. When we compare ourselves with, the posts or the pictures or the stories that somebody else posts, we might want to remember that we're only seeing the good in this person's life. There's so much happening in the background of their life that they're choosing to not show us, right? There might be so many imperfections, so many problems, so many challenges that they're going through that we don't see, because social media is specifically meant for sharing the good parts, for sharing, the highlight reels of our life. So when we compare ourselves with all of these good parts of people's life on social media, that might lead us to feel inferior, that might lead us to have low confidence, because we're constantly comparing ourselves with them and we're falling short. And that leads to a lot of self-doubt, that leads to a lot of self-criticism that can then impact our self-esteem. Social media is also rife with ideas about productivity, ideas about health, ideas about fitness that are not necessarily suited to our cultural context. But what happens when we see these ideas constantly being repeated on social media is that we try to apply them to our life. And sometimes we might try to apply them to our life without really thinking about, okay, is this suited for my context? Is this suited for my life? Right? When we try to apply something that doesn't really fit within our life, it's natural that it may not work. And when something like that doesn't work, then we sort of feel disappointed. We feel like, okay, I'm not doing anything with my life, or I'm not even able to do this one tiny thing. But what we might forget is that certain ideas may not be relevant to our context. Certain ideas that we borrow from the Western context, for example, may not be super, super relevant to our context. The last impact of social media on self-esteem is also in terms of promoting what a perfect or an ideal life should look like, right? Just going back to that point about only focusing on the good parts or only focusing on the highlight reels, when this is what we see on social media exclusively, we might start to think that, okay, this is what life looks like. When we constantly see our friends sharing stories of them hanging out with other friends or them traveling or them going places, we start thinking that, okay, this is what life is supposed to look like. And if my life doesn't look like that right now, it must mean that I am doing something wrong. It must mean that I'm not adequate enough, or I'm not enough to do all of these things. And then that leaves us in a spiral of negative thoughts about ourselves. Right. So when we see certain things being represented on social media, when we see certain lifestyles being represented on social media, we might confuse them with the perfect and the ideal, because that's how social media pushes these narratives. We might confuse them with what is perfect and what is ideal, and then we might constantly compare our lives with these ideals or these perceived perfections. And again, I just want to reiterate that while it's completely normal for us to compare ourselves with other people sometimes, we have to be more cautious. We have to be more mindful of what that comparison is doing to us. Is the comparison motivating us to do better? Is the comparison leaving us feeling bad about ourselves? Is it leaving us with a lot of negative feelings about ourselves? We might want to ask ourselves these questions before we compare ourselves with something that we see on social media. So that was just a little bit about the impact of, social media on self-esteem. Does anyone have any thoughts that they might want to share? Anything that's come up for them while we've been talking? All right. If anything does come up, as usual, feel free to put it in the chat. I'm just going to move on to speaking about the potential positives, right, of social media on our body image and our self-esteem. We spoke a lot about some of the unhelpful or some of the unhealthy ways in which social media can impact our body image and self-esteem, but we might also want to speak about the positives, which is that social media can also provide us a very strong platform for supporting body positivity, right? When we talk about body positivity, the idea behind body positivity is that we are more accepting, we are more respectful of our appearances, and we give our bodies the love that they deserve. So that is the idea behind body positivity. And social media can be a very helpful tool in reaching out to people and setting up platforms for body positivity that can spread the ideas of body positivity. Social media can also enable access to social support and community building, right? We might be able to join forums, we might be able to join communities on social media that are helpful to us, that contribute positively to our life. Right? So social media is also very helpful sort of an avenue for us to establish and nurture all of these new social relationships. And social media is also a very creative, outlet that encourages self-expression. A lot of us may post, the art that we make or the writing that we do, or anything that allows us to express ourselves onto social media, right? Even if it is in the form of sharing a story of a song you're listening to or a movie you're watching. You get all of these opportunities to express yourself, which are also very, very important for our self-esteem. Not constant, but regular self-expression is really, really important for our self-esteem. So social media can be really helpful that way because it allows us to have a voice. It allows us to feel seen and it allows us to feel heard, right? Lastly, social media can also be helpful in keeping in touch with the world and what is important to you, right? We use social media to keep in touch with our loved ones who live far away, who are also close by to us. We use social media as a tool to constantly nurture these connections, constantly nurture these relationships and keep them alive. And social media also allows us to support causes that are important to us, right? It also allows us to root or rally for causes that are important to us, or to support people who are important to you. So when we speak about the impact of social media on body image and self-esteem, we don't want to discredit the potential positives that it has. We don't want to discredit the fact that social media does allow so many of us to get to know ourselves a little bit better. It allows us to develop positive relationships with ourselves, right? We don't want to discredit any of that. We just want to be mindful of the potential negative impacts that it has as well. Now that we've spoken a little bit about, both the negative and the positive impacts of social media, I want to move on to what we can do, right? When we speak about social media use, when we speak about the impact of social media on our body image and self-esteem, what can we do so that it doesn't end up impacting us negatively? What can we do to be more cautious of this relationship? All right. First thing that we can always prioritize is being mindful of what and how much we consume on social media, right? A lot of us at least have a social media presence on 2 social media applications on an average. And we're constantly getting so much information from all of these platforms that it becomes really, really important for us to be mindful of what and how much we consume. A lot of the times, our consumption of these social media apps or the information on these apps is very automatic. We don't think twice before reading a message and just, inculcating it or just allowing it to be ingrained within us. So what we do need to do is we need to make it a habit to question and think critically before we accept any messages that come on social media, right? Media literacy, digital literacy, and just media criticism in general is very, very important, because on social media currently, we see so many brands, so many advertisements trying to sell things to us, right? And when they're trying to sell things to us, it becomes more important for us to be critical in the kind of content that we consume. Because at the end of the day, brands are going to try to push their, products. They are going to make sure you buy their products, right? So they're going to do what it takes, essentially. So the responsibility comes to us to think critically and to be more, cautious, to be more careful before we accept any messages. You might want to ask yourself questions like, who is the target audience of this particular ad or this particular message that I'm seeing? What sort of an emotion is it intended to bring up in me? What is this message trying to tell me? And do I want to accept what it's trying to tell me? So we have to be a little bit more mindful of what we consume. We also need to choose what kind of social media content we want to engage in, right? We may want to strive to create a supportive social media, presence, and we might also want to curate our feeds. So when we talk about social media, the good thing is that we're free to make use of the block buttons, the mute buttons, and to curate our feed in a way that feels positive to us, right? So if there is certain content on your social media feed that is leaving you feeling negative, that is leaving you feeling very bad about yourselves, we might want to not engage with that content and instead choose content that makes us feel positive, that makes us feel good about ourselves. Right. So we might want to curate our feed in a way that it doesn't leave us feeling very negative. It doesn't leave us feeling very drained at the end of your scrolling experience. And supportive social media habits are also very, very important, because supportive social media habits can look like being more mindful of your usage. That is, how much do you use? What apps do you spend a lot of time on? What sort of content do you engage with the most? Just reflecting on all of these aspects for ourselves can be really, really helpful. We also may want to refrain from making comparisons with other people on social media, right? We might want to just constantly remind ourselves that we only see a part of their life. They see just a part of our life. And similarly, we also only see a part of their life, right? So we might want to refrain from making comparisons, constant comparisons of people on social media that leave us feeling negative about ourselves. We might also want to pay attention to what our body does for us. In our conversation today also, right, we focused a bit on how our body looks, what the appearance of our body is like. We might want to move a little bit towards what our body does for us, right? That is, in terms of our body's functionality, right? Apart from the way my body looks, my body also allows me to do my day-to-day tasks. It allows me to show up to this webinar. It allows me to speak to all of you about these topics that are important to us. It allows me to cook. It allows me to keep myself alive, essentially, right? So we might want to focus and shift our attention to what our body does for you as well, which is the idea behind what we call body neutrality. So the idea behind body neutrality is that from an appearance-based perspective, we slowly move on to a functionality-based perspective. That is, we try to focus on what our body does for us instead of just how it looks or what its appearance is like. So for those of us who find it a little difficult to be very body positive and to be to have a very positive relationship with our body, we might want to practice body neutrality instead as a step or as a way in the journey towards body positivity. Body neutrality can look like being grateful to your body for everything that it does for you. It can look like acknowledging your body for all the functions that it does to help you, stay alive, to help you reach all of these goals in your life and to help you do the things that matter to you. We might also want to invest time and energy in areas of our life that hold meaning for us, right? The more we spend time, the more, we engage and very actively build different areas of our life that are important to us, the more things we can base our self-esteem on. Right? It can be helpful for us to have all these different sources of self-esteem so that we don't end up overly relying on one area or one aspect of our identity as our only base for self-esteem. So if our only base for self-esteem is our body image, and if we have a negative body image, that might affect our self-esteem to such a great extent that it might directly translate into a negative, self-esteem. But if I have other things in life that are important to me, like my hobbies, my interests, my work, my family, my relationships, then the effect of having a negative or an unhealthy body image can be mitigated just a little bit. We might also want to disconnect and take regular social media breaks. So when we spend a lot of time on social media, right, we end up disconnected with what is happening around us. We end up disconnected with the real parts of our lives, right? So we may want to disconnect a little bit and take regular social media breaks so that we're able to foster that sense of connectedness and support with the people and the community around us. Speaking about community, we might also want to seek healthy and supportive friendships, right? When we speak about having friendships, when we speak about having relationships, we might want to have relationships that make us feel good about ourselves, right? We want to have friends that are supportive to us. We might want to have friends that encourage us to be who we are and that allow us to be more comfortable in our skin. So we might want to seek healthy and supportive friendships wherever we can and spend time with people actively outside of social media. The more time we spend with people outside of social media, the more time we spend in the world, spending time with the people who are important to us, we start to recognize that what we see on social media is not all there is to us, or that's not all there is to other people as well. We start to look at ourselves as real people with real flaws, real imperfections that are completely okay. Social media may make us believe that all of our imperfections are not okay, that any imperfection that you see needs to be fixed immediately. But when we spend time in the real world, we're able to acknowledge and accept that it's okay for us to have these imperfections and they don't mean as much about us as we think they do. Lastly, we want to create a healthy relationship with our body that is based on respect, that is based on nurturance, that is based on acceptance, that is based on curiosity. Right? We want to be curious about our bodies. We want to be curious about what our bodies do. We want to be respectful towards our bodies, right? And that is definitely a process, right? Because when we speak about years and years of conditioning to look at our bodies in a certain way, to have a certain kind of a relationship with our body, it might also take us years and years to unlearn these messages that we have learned and to have a positive relationship with our body, right? So going forward, we might want to be curious about our bodies. We might want to be more grateful to our bodies for what they do for us, and we might want to be more accepting of them. And that can look like just spending more time feeling good in your body, doing things that make you feel good, disengaging with things that make you feel negative about your body. These are just some things that we can do in our day-to-day lives, just to be more mindful about the impact that social media has on us. If you guys have any suggestions of what else you could possibly do or what else you might want to do, feel free to just put it in the chat, and feel free to just share about what else you might want to do or what else you might have done in your life as well. This is the end of my presentation for today. If anyone has anything that they want to share, anything that they might want to, spotlight or highlight, feel free to unmute or put it in the chat as well. If there are any questions that are coming up, please feel free to put them in the chat and we can all address them together.
Thank you so much, Shruti. In case someone from the audience is having any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. You're allowed to unmute or write it in the chat box so that I can read out for. I hope you can use this opportunity to ask or share your feelings. We're all here on the same terms. So anything you feel, it need not be a question. It can also be just an experience that you want to share or any thoughts, anything. Anyone? All right. In case in case no one has any questions, you can feel free to write to us, give your feedback about the session, and also write to us on how can we help you if you want to have a personal connect with Shruti or anyone from our team. We would definitely be happy to help you out and arrange for such sessions. So, Shruti, we have the phone number and the QR in the next slide.
Just a second.
Yeah.
Please feel free to reach out to the team. If you want to have conversations, if there is anything that you would like to work on, please feel free to make use of the opportunity, and we will do our best to sort of help you fulfill any needs, to sort of meet any goals that you have set for yourself in terms of your health goals or in terms of your mental health goals. So feel free to reach out to anybody from the team. And Vaishnavi has also put a feedback form in the chat. Please fill that out. It will allow us to cater to your needs better and pay more attention to what you as a community would require from us as well. So feel free to reach out anytime and do make use of all of the plans that are introduced for all of you as well. And it was really nice speaking to everyone here today. Like Vaishnavi said, if you want to get in touch with anybody from the team, if you want to get in touch with me as well, feel free to do that, and we will be happy to help you.